We all want to get more out of our crafty stash, don't we? I do too, and today I'm excited to be part of a small video hop with some new crafty friends to celebrate Mother's Day. All the details are on my blog and in the description box below. Once I finished making my Mother's Day card, I decided to challenge myself to see if the products I used could get me through the whole year. Ready? Let's get started. Here's the die set I chose to work with. This is 3D Field Flower from the Stamp Market. It has 2 large and 2 small floral dies, along with 2 circle flower center dies. What makes this set a great choice for all seasons is that the type of flower is not defined. It's just a flower. I'm starting with Mother's Day, which is in the spring, and I'm going to use those little flowers to make some daisies from white cardstock. But I'm also planning ahead to the fall and a different technique, so I actually cut 12 of the small flowers from a full card panel and in a bit of a pattern. We'll come back to that full panel in about 6 months or so. For now, I'll focus on creating 3 daisies by simply layering up the white petals. When I'm working on multiples of items like this, I find it easiest to count everything out before I start gluing, so I put the flowers into a little 3x4 grid before getting out my Barely Art glue and working along row by row. I piled the flowers up on top of each other, trying to turn them slightly so that as many petals as possible are visible, and it created a nice full daisy. Because the little flowers are asymmetrical, I got a nice organic look. When I had all 3 flowers glued together, I wanted to decide which flower center would look better. I created some yellow cardstock by swiping some ink onto white cardstock, and I also swiped some green ink onto white cardstock to create my stems and leaves. I find it easiest to create just the right amount of colored cardstock in this way, and it allows me to create cardstock that matches any stamping I might do. Plus, it means I don't have to try and find room to store lots of colored cardstock scraps. I just keep one drawer filled with white scraps. Okay, so here's how the 2 sizes of the flower centers look, and I definitely prefer the pop of color I get from the larger one. I think the smaller one would work best on a 1-layered flower, but it kind of gets lost on these fuller daisies. I created my stems by just trimming off very narrow strips from that green cardstock I created, and then to make my leaf, I actually partially cut one of the larger flowers from the set, and I used a petal. I thought this one would be best because it kind of bends just like a leaf would. For my background, I blended some pale aqua ink onto a panel of white cardstock, going heavy at the top and letting it fade out to white by lightening the pressure of my hand. Each time I came in with fresh ink, I started at the top and worked my way down to get lighter and lighter coverage until it faded out to white. I placed my daisies where I wanted them on the panel, and then I added liquid glue to those narrow strips. The nice thing was that they're so narrow I could bend them a bit to get more interest. I added the flower heads on top, and then I went to place the leaves I had created with those kind of bent petals. And I didn't think they fit very well. They felt a bit heavy and not as delicate as the petals of the daisies. So I took another look at the large flower dies and cut another longer, straighter, skinnier petal, and I used that one instead. For my sentiment, I used this alphabet from iCrafter, which has small letters with both upper and lower case, and I cut 3 layers of MOM. I stacked them up and glued them together. I wanted them to be kind of the same height as my layered daisies. I'm building the rest of my sentiment with a little I love you from Mama Elephant, and I placed the die-cut letters on my panel so that I could get the positioning right. I have one of the new sticky Misty mats in my Misty, and I find it so helpful for holding the cardstock in place while I'm stamping. To be sure that it's straight, I first stamp my sentiment onto a piece of clear acetate over the card. Then if I need to adjust anything, I can do that as many times as it takes to get it exactly where I want it. Once I had that stamped, I used the grid on the sticky mat to help me line up my 3 die-cut letters. Then I lifted them with some low-tack tape. I used yellow tape from Spellbinders because it's quite translucent, and that will allow me to see the letters when it comes time to place them onto the card. I removed some of the stick from the tape by pressing it down onto my jeans, and then I picked the letters up and added liquid glue to the backs. I put the panel back into my Misty on that sticky mat so that it wouldn't shift, and I used the grid lines to help me line up the MOM die cuts before pressing them down. Once the glue had set a little bit, I carefully peeled back the yellow tape. I love the fresh simplicity of this card, and it's perfect for spring and Mother's Day. I added some magic crystal gems to the flower centers for a bit of sparkle, These are clear with an iridescent shine, so they pick up whatever color is underneath them to match the card perfectly. Now let's skip ahead a couple of months. The weather's warming up, the sun is out, and it's feeling tropical. I grabbed some intense yellows and pinks from my Catherine Pooler ink collection, and I swiped them onto a couple of panels of cardstock. I overlapped the inks to create even more shades, and I made sure that the panels were fully covered. I put more yellow on one and more pink on the other just to get some different looks on my two flowers. Then I started over with another panel and some greens and aquas. As you can see, I love using my Catherine Pooler inks in this way, and I also love to ink blend, so I have refills for most of my favorite colors because you do go through ink faster with these techniques than if you're just stamping with them. As the colorful panels dried, I blended some blue ink onto a card panel. This blue is more intense than my spring card, and this time I went in from all four sides, letting it fade a little into the center. Then while that panel dried, I cut two flowers from the pink panels and one from the green. Once again, I'm using some of the petals as leaves on my card. To do that, I simply used scissors to cut the petals apart, and then I laid them out with the flowers on my card panel. Now these colors are very intense, so some fresh white is a welcome addition. I used white cardstock to cut two more of the small flowers, as well as my sentiment, to give me a bit of breathing space in all that vibrancy. To finish this one, I added a little sub-sentiment from that same stamp set, along with some of those magic crystal gems to the white flower centers and around the sentiment. Now things are starting to cool off, the leaves are turning glorious, and Thanksgiving is coming. I'm using that die-cut panel I created for my Mother's Day card, along with another panel of cardstock. I'll easily be able to get two cards with this stenciling technique, and that's even another way to get more from your crafty stash. The solid white panel is cut slightly smaller than my homemade stencil, and that allows me to tape it to the stencil from the back so I can get full coverage on the stencil itself. If I taped the front of the stencil down, there would be areas that didn't get ink blended. Then I just grabbed a handful of autumn colors. I started with my lightest, Sauna, and I moved on to Ginger and Terracotta, which are part of Catherine's latest collection. Then I moved on to Eucalyptus, which is a really deep olive green, and I finished off with Daydream, which is a deep blue. This not only adds an unexpected twist to my fall color scheme, but it blends really nicely with all the others. To finish this card, I added a big two-layered thank you sentiment from Waffle Flower, along with another little stamp sentiment from that Mama Elephant set. I also added some golden illusion gems to the centers of the flowers. Now winter is coming, but before it does, let's talk a little bit about the types of products that you can dig out that are easy to use all year long. As I said, I chose this die set because the flowers are not defined as any one flower, and there are flowers that are appropriate for every season. I think simple shapes could also work. I'm thinking circles, squares, ovals, and along those lines. I think any geometrics would work. Think about cover plates or smaller shaped dies or stencils you may have. Pretty much any product that isn't specifically seasonal would work. So once you've decided on the stamps or dies or stencils you want to use, it really comes down to two more things that make a card feel seasonal: the colors you choose and using seasonally appropriate sentiments and embellishments. What do you have that you think could be stretched by using it out of season? Let me know in the comments below. Now let's brave the winter. For this card, these flowers are going to become poinsettias. I have a 5x7 gel plate here, and I'm sprinkling over some red watercolor powder. Then I spritzed water over top and pressed down some white Neenah index cardstock. This is a very light cardstock, and I like it for this because even though it's not watercolor cardstock, it really doesn't warp too much, or if it does, it flattens again really easily. Look at the beautiful variation in this. I want to do another one with more intense red color, so I repeated the process with more red powder and I pulled another print. Then I cleaned the plate and I did one more print with green powders, and I left all three of them to dry. Then I cut them with the larger flower dies, splattered them with some metallic gold watercolor paint and a paintbrush. This will give them all a subtle, festive, shiny touch. To finish this card, I cut a square from gray cardstock and then a circle from the center. Because I used the Essential Circles dies from Ellen Hudson, I was able to create a negative frame, which helps to define the poinsettia. I added some sparkle in the center with some Crafty Meraki golden illusion gems. Because the flower is so big and is so clearly a poinsettia, I didn't even add a sentiment to this one. We've cycled through the whole year and we're right back where we started, at Mother's Day. Now it's time to click the link in the description below to hop to the next video and get even more inspiration. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.